Okay, so you sent over this research on cannabis and sexuality. And I gotta say, I had some ideas about this topic already, but
Yeah.
after digging in, it's way more complicated than I thought.
Yeah, it's one of those things, right? Lots of opinions floating around, but the actual science, it's surprisingly complex.
Which is perfect for a deep dive then. So we've got these two research papers you shared, and there's a lot to unpack.
Definitely. We're going beyond just like stories and anecdotes here. Got to see what the data really says.
Okay, so first up, this whole thing about cannabis being an aphrodisiac, super common idea, right? And one of the studies even said over 70% of people felt more desire when using it. So, is that it then? Case closed.
Well, hold on a sec. That number definitely grabs your attention, but got to remember how these studies work. People are reporting their own experiences, and that's always tricky with sex.
Makes sense. Hard to be, perfectly objective about that stuff, haha.
Exactly. There's this pressure to, maybe answer a certain way,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to this topic. Plus, you got to factor in how much cannabis itself has changed.
Oh, yeah, good point. The stuff people are using now versus decades ago, totally different, right?
Night and day. The
Yeah.
THC levels now are through the roof compared to back in the day.
I saw a study on that actually in one of these papers. The difference between the 90s and now is huge.
Exactly. What they considered a high dose back then is like normal now.
Yeah.
So trying to use old research to understand what's going on now, it's a real challenge.
Okay, so then how do scientists even start figuring this out when what we even call cannabis is different all the time?
That leads into a huge issue in this whole field of research dosage. You read these studies, and people say, I use cannabis. But what does that even mean? Someone's little bit could be a whole lot for someone else.
Haha. It's like comparing apples and some kind of supercharged space apple or something.
Exactly. And that makes it almost impossible to compare different studies and be like, okay, this is the answer. Even with edibles, which should be more exact, there's still variation in how they're made, what they say on the label, the whole 9 yards.
So we're already seeing layers of complexity here. You've got how people experience things differently, the fact that cannabis itself keeps changing, and now this dosage problem on top of it all. And it's like, we haven't even talked about men and women, right? That's a whole other thing.
Oh, absolutely. It gets even more interesting, I guess we could say, when you look at those differences.
Because some of the research, it's like men and women are having totally opposite experiences with cannabis and sex.
Yeah, and that's what makes this such a challenge to study, honestly. You can't just be like, cannabis does this, because it's different for everyone.
Okay, so based on these papers we're looking at, what are some of the big differences researchers are seeing?
So for women, some promising stuff about how cannabis might help with painful intercourse,
Mm-hmm.
which, that's huge.
Yeah, no kidding. Pain during sex, I mean, that can really mess with someone's life, their relationships.
Totally. And we're not just talking about making it bearable. Some research suggests cannabis might actually make things more pleasurable, even lead to more frequent orgasms. Though, gotta say, we need way more research on that specifically.
Of course, there's no magic bullet for this stuff. But what about men? Any of those potential benefits there too?
Here's where it gets messy. So some studies, they say cannabis could help with erectile function, but then others are like, nope, might actually increase the risk of erectile dysfunction. It's all over the place.
Ugh, I bet that's frustrating if you're just a regular person trying to figure out what this all means.
Exactly. It's like every time you think you're getting a handle on it, there's another study saying the opposite.
Yeah.
But it's like you got to look at the bigger picture, right? Everyone's body is different. How we process cannabis, how it interacts with our own brain chemistry, even just our own personal experiences with sex.
Yeah.
All that plays a role.
So you're saying there's not going to be one right answer. It's about all these individual factors.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting to study, even if it's a huge pain in the butt sometimes. There's still so much we don't know. But by really looking at the research and, being honest about what it can and can't tell us, that's how we start to get a clearer picture.
So, okay, it's not as easy as cannabis good for sex or cannabis bad for sex. What are we actually supposed to take away from all this? How do we make sense of it?
Well, it's about realizing it's not just do you use it,
Mm.
but how do you use it? Dosage, how often you're using it, those things matter.
So, someone who's using cannabis every day is going to have a way different experience than someone who, I don't know, just enjoys it once in a while.
That's what the research is pointing to, yeah. We see studies where frequent use is linked to being more sexually active, which, okay, interesting. But VT, then others are like, hold up, too much use can actually mess with how much pleasure you feel.
Yeah.
So finding that balance is key.
All right, which brings us back to the dosage problem, doesn't it? How are we supposed to find that sweet spot when there's no real way to even measure it.
And you're right, it's a huge EE limitation. One study, though, I thought this was fascinating. They found that smoking like 1 or 2 low THC cigarettes seemed to increase desire. But any more than that, no added benefit.
So little goes a long way, but too much, and you're not really getting anything extra out of it.
Exactly. Some researchers call it the inverted U theory, basically. There's this sweet spot with low to moderate doses where you might get those enhancing effects. Go too high.
Yeah.
Could backfire.
Okay, now that's super interesting. But hold on, we keep saying cannabis this, cannabis that. It's not all the same, is it? Different strains and stuff, those gotta have different effects too, right?
Bingo. Another layer of complexity. So different strains, they got different ratios of THC to CBD. That's going to impact how they hit you.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you've got how you're consuming it. Smoking's different from edibles, obviously. Even just how the cannabis is prepped can make a difference.
Sounds like we've barely scratched the surface here.
You could say that again.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is, with cannabis becoming more accepted, more legalized, we're seeing more research happening. Hopefully that means a better understanding of how this all plays out in our sex lives. The good and the bad.
It's about time. You know, going through all this, it really makes you think. If those lower doses are what we're aiming for, could we see a future where people are, like, microdosing cannabis specifically to enhance intimacy? Wild thought.
That's a really interesting idea. Could personalized cannabis products, tailored for exactly what someone wants and needs, be the future of sexual wellness? Who knows?
So much to think about. This deep dive really threw me for a loop, honestly. Challenged some of my assumptions, that's for sure. But hey, that's what we're here for, right?
Absolutely. This is just the beginning of the conversation, really. But thanks to the research being done and people like you who are willing to talk about it openly, we're getting closer to understanding this whole cannabis and sexuality thing.
Well said. And listeners, that goes for you too. Keep that conversation going. Until next time, keep exploring.